Hi, everyone, and welcome to another PRISMS webinar, Food Seeking Behavior Management. My name is Allison Stefanok, and I am a board member for PRISMS, and I'm also the education chair. I am also the mom to a 9-year-old daughter with Smith-Magenis syndrome. This webinar is brought to you by PRISMS. PRISMS is an acronym for Parents and Researchers Interested in Smith-Magenis Syndrome. PRISMS is an advocacy, education, and support organization for individuals with Smith-Magenis syndrome, their families, and the professionals who serve them. Smith-Magenis syndrome is rare and not always well understood. So one of the many ways PRISMS supports the SMS community is through this webinar series, providing information directly from the experts to our community in an easily accessible way. A recording of this webinar and all past webinars, as well as a listing of future webinars, can be found on the PRISMS website, prisms.org, under the Education tab. If you have any questions for our speaker during the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation, we will take some time to answer as many as we can live. We may not get to all of them tonight. So our topic for this evening is Food-Seeking Behavior Management with Dr. Amy McTighe. Dr. Amy McTighe is the Director of Prader-Willi Care Coordination at the Children's Institute of Pittsburgh. She's presented on Prader-Willi syndrome on the national and international level several times, and she's also been a speaker at PRISMS Conference and the Research Symposium. Welcome, Dr. McTighe, and thank you so much for being with us here this evening.
Thanks, Allison. I appreciate that, and I appreciate thank you to PRISMS for allowing me to speak tonight. So I'm going to get into my presentation. Okay, so let's see. I hope everybody can see that. Okay. So like Allison said, my name's Dr. Amy McTighe. I am the Director of Care Coordination at the Children's Institute. And tonight we're going to talk about managing food-seeking behaviors. Our agenda for this evening is going to be focused on how are Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis syndrome similar. We're going to talk about how Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis are different. We're going to talk about managing food-seeking behaviors and how you provide a structured meal routine around food and meal times. We're also going to talk about managing food-seeking behaviors across all environments. And, oops, wait. Okay, sorry.
I think
happened. Here, hold on.
Yes, I think we can't see your slides at the moment, so maybe
something just happened. Okay, hold on. Can you see them now?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay, sorry. It's like, wait, it just ended. Okay, so let's start back from the beginning. So from tonight, what we're going to talk about is how Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis syndrome are similar. We're also going to talk about how Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis are different. We're going to get into how you manage food-seeking behaviors and providing a structured meal routine at all scheduled meal times. We're going to talk about managing food-seeking behaviors across all environments, as well as behaviors related to food. We're also going to talk about food-seeking behaviors and trainings that are available. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a new program that we have here at the Children's Institute that's called Prader-Willi Syndrome Care Coordination. And we also serve clients with Smith-Magenis and other obesity-related disorders. And then we can answer, and then I can answer some questions. And I also have my contact information at the end of the slides. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about how Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis syndrome are similar. So Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis are similar in a lot of different ways. They're both neurodevelopmental disorders. Many of the clients that are diagnosed with Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis also have an intellectual disability, and they have many co-occurring disorders as well. So they have an intellectual disability at times. There is oftentimes sleep disturbance. There's that early onset of obesity and behavioral deficits that are present in both syndromes. Food-related problems in persons with Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis often appear at the same ages. And so food-related problems can often appear as early as ages 5 through 11. And it also can manifest more severely in ages 12 to 18. One of the things to keep in mind with both of these syndromes is that they are very much a spectrum disorder. So every person with Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis is not going to present the same. They're very much a spectrum disorder on both syndromes. Both syndromes have the same behavioral manifestations related to food. So there's also a lot of preoccupation with food. There is impaired satiety at times, and there are negative behavioral responses in both of these syndromes. Now, if you look at the basics as to why Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis are different, PWS is a mutation or a deletion of chromosome 15. And if you look at this slide, or this picture to the left of this slide, this is a typically developing chromosome. So whenever an infant is born, there is chromosome 15 Q11-Q13, which is the part of the chromosome that PWS is missing in chromosome 15. This chromosome is what this looks like as the similar the exact normal characteristics. And there's 3 different types of PWS. So this is the paternal deletion, where there's actually a whole piece of chromosome 15 missing. This is the maternal deletion, which there is actually 2 of the same chromosome 15 from mom. And then there's also an imprinting defect in Prader-Willi syndrome, which is a small piece of chromosome 15 that is just defective. And as you can see in this slide over here, Smith-Magenis is a mutation or a deletion of chromosome 17. So they are 2 very different chromosomes, but they all, even though they are very different chromosomes, they do produce the same symptoms in many different people that are diagnosed with both of these syndromes. So I want to get into talking about a little bit related to managing food-seeking behaviors. These things that I'm going to talk about can actually be best practices that you put into place for a person with Prader-Willi syndrome, or even a person with Smith-Magenis, a person that is also diagnosed with pica. So when you talk about a structured routine, you really want to establish a meal pattern immediately. You want to make sure that the person that you're working with or your loved one has a specific idea as to when breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, or desserts, or whatever it is, are going to be served to them. You're going to establish that meal pattern, and it's going to be very consistent across the board. Posting a daily or weekly menu is also very helpful, so it doesn't leave any time that is going to be unsure of what is going to be given at any structured meal. No serving bowls at the table is also something that's really important. This picture actually shows some ways that we support persons with Prader-Willi syndrome whenever giving them a structured meal routine. And as you can see in this picture, there is a lot of different dishes. There's not one specific dish that a person is going to have all of their food on. All of this is structured into small containers so that it actually is presented to look like more food, but it's also actually very portioned. It's also very portioned out, and it does well with portion control. So you'll see this is actually a picture of a 300-calorie meal. And so all of this actually looks like a lot more food, but it's very portioned out to make it look more because it's in different containers. We never recommend serving bowls at the table because that can cause high anxiety for persons with Smith-Magenis and Prader-Willi syndrome. There should also be no preparation in no participation in meal preparation or cleanup. That also is something that has been proven to cause an extreme level of anxiety in persons with Smith-Magenis and other obesity-related disorders. Like I said, using those disposable containers to make the meal look bigger is also something that makes a really big difference. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to talk a lot about was what another thing that you can do during the structured mealtime that is a great strategy to assist with a lot of different things. About 4 years ago, we did a research study here at the Children's Institute that looked at determining whether or not persons with Prader-Willi syndrome were at the risk for aspiration or choking. And what we found was that out of the 100 patients that we surveyed and did a modified barium swallow on, we actually did a fluoroscopic x-ray as well. So when they were given the modified barium cookie, we looked to see they would swallow the cookie, and then we would ask them, does that cookie feel as if it went to your throat or into your stomach? And what we saw was that 99% of the people that we surveyed were saying yes, that they felt that they swallowed it, but because of the low muscle tone, it was actually stuck in their throats. And so a strategy that we came up with at the Children's Institute is called the Pace and Chase program. And this actually works with all persons with obesity-related disorders and Smith-Magenis. It works with, basically what it does is it decreases the risk for aspiration or choking. So what you do is you provide pictures or picture clues, or you can also provide written format of this as well. But basically what the Pace and Chase strategy is that you allow the person to take 2 bites and then take a drink to actually flush that food down into their stomach, that fluid is going to decrease the risk for choking or aspiration. So basically, you're encouraging those drinks between every 2 to 3 bites, and then putting visual cues on the table where the individuals eat to kind of remind them that this is what we want them to do. This also actually helps with slowing down the amount of food that they're consuming at one time. So if you give these picture cues or verbal cues or even words in a structured routine, in a structured setting, it really helps with decreasing aspiration, choking, and really making them slow down to eat food so that they're not shoving food in their mouth as fast as possible. So the Pace and Chase strategy is a great resource. Managing food-seeking behaviors across all environments is really difficult. And at times, it's just really not realistic. It's really hard to make an environment completely food secure. One of the things that we recommend very frequently for persons with Prader-Willi syndrome, and which has that I have seen being consistent and helpful for a person with Smith-Magenis as well, is locking food. Locks and alarms are really used so that food cannot be accessed at a time outside of meal times. So we're really looking at having people with these syndromes access food in socially appropriate ways. And when we talk about socially appropriate ways, what that means is actually accessing food at the scheduled mealtime. They're not stealing food from the refrigerator. They're not getting food from somebody's book bag. They're not planning to go and access food, but they're getting it at socially appropriate times, which is the scheduled mealtime. There's so many people that I've trained across the country that will say, well, that seems so cruel, but it actually is extremely life-saving. Whenever you lock food for persons with Prader-Willi syndrome or Smith-Magenis or pica or any of those disorders, it actually is extremely life-saving because there is not a risk that they would have medical conditions related to over access to food. The locks and alarms are actually a really huge safety measure for all syndromes. And so it really prevents, number one, binge eating so that they're able to get access to food and eat large amounts of food at one time. It also really prevents extraordinary weight gain. And so if you're really working with the person to provide a really structured meal that is lower in calories and they have access to extra food, they're not going to be in a position where they have extraordinary weight gain. It also decreases anxiety for a lot of persons with food-related food-seeking behaviors because they don't feel guilt that the food can be obtained or that they got it for a reason that they should, in a situation where they should not have. So it really decreases the anxiety for all people with these disorders and these syndromes. One of the questions that I get whenever I do this training, that I talk about food-seeking behaviors in all of these different syndromes is, what is the best age to lock food? When should I lock food? Is it appropriate to lock immediately, or is it appropriate to lock whenever I start to see some food-seeking behaviors? There's no real specific age that lock should be applied. So when you're locking, the best practice is always to lock for safety. And I often have found that whenever you start locking, even if you if you start immediately locking, you really are going to decrease the chance that that food-seeking behavior is going to occur because that's just the normal part of their environment. When you really want to think about locking food is when you start to see a really increased preoccupation for food, increased food-seeking behaviors, so lots of unexplained weight gain, food is missing, or that person tells you that they're taking food. So I was working with a client in the center of the country in the state of Kansas. And one of the things that she was saying was that it just, there was no way that her son was getting food. And I said, well, there is an unexplainable weight gain. So I'm not really sure exactly why he's gaining weight when you're not sure that you're absolutely 100% positive that he's not getting food. And what ended up happening with this client was that he was stealing food off of the bus. And when he came home, he would go into the bathroom at home and he would shove wrappers down the back of the toilet. And the mom realized that there were issues with him getting food on the bus whenever the local plumber had to come to her house, and she had to get all of those wrappers because they were so backed up in the back of the toilet. So really, when you notice those types of sneaking behaviors of food, if you notice that there are planned planned events to elope to get food, those are times when you really want to sit down with somebody and really discuss the opportunities for locking. But like I said, a best practice is always to lock for safety from the beginning, just because it does decrease that anxiety for a lot of people with these very complex syndromes. Okay, so when you talk about managing food-seeking behaviors across all environments, another thing that I like to talk about is calorie bargaining for special events. So when there's situations where the child, you're really focusing on, we have a special event, we have a birthday party, or we have this event that is going to happen in our family structure. Basically, what calorie bargaining means is reducing the usual energy intake prior to a party or a special event, where you know that higher energy foods are going to be consumed. So for example, at a birthday party, you might manage the extra calories to control weight gain in the situation where you might say, okay, I'm going to take away this food, but not to the person with the syndrome. You're going to say, I might change the natural meal routine, but because I'm just going to take a little bit away to make up for the extra calories that we're getting later. You're managing the extra calories really to control the weight gain, so that whenever they participate in something like this, that it's not going to be something that is going to cause a lot of weight gain due to the event. This is also assists with socialization around food. And so it's something that if you are bargaining for calories and you're saying, okay, we're going to take this away so that you can have this, it also assists with socialization. However, I have also seen calorie bargaining not working for everyone. And so changing that actual natural meal routine and that structure and predictability of that meal setting is something that really causes some behavior problems and really does just increase anxiety that things are changing and the problems, you know, with the transition of that specific change if they're not prepared appropriately ahead of time. So many of the people that I work with across the country will really stay away from calorie bargaining and really focus on just keeping that structured meal routine as consistent and as predictable as possible. Okay, so this is an example of how I have seen calorie bargaining. These are a couple examples of how I have seen calorie bargaining being successful. So everything about food with these specific complex syndromes is really about the planning of how that's going to look. So when you, like, for example, I've seen many families use preparing like children that their loved ones with whenever they go out to eat. So they know prior to going into the restaurant that they're going to take half of what is ordered, the ordered food, and put it into a container box or a to-go box, and then really prepare them that before going to the restaurant, that they're going to eat half of the food at the restaurant and the rest of the food for lunch tomorrow. So they know that that's going to happen. And I have also seen parents really prepare this to the point where they actually even say this to the waitress: the food is not on their plate. We're going to take half of what we ordered. They're going to keep it in the kitchen. When we leave, we're going to take it with us. So the less exposure to food is what really helps the calorie bargaining as well. Another example is actually reducing the quantity of meat on a plate or removing a carbohydrate from the evening meal, 3 days prior to Thanksgiving or a holiday, to allow for that extra food that's consumed during that holiday. I have seen that really working very successful, because one of the reasons is that works great is because when you have a posted, structured, predictable meal in a menu posted, it really does, the child or the adult doesn't really think about it, because if you remove the meat or the carbohydrate, that is something that's on there. It's just not on their menu for that day. So what they have on their menu is what they have in their head that they are going to get. And so when you remove those things prior to those special events like Thanksgiving, it really helps with getting that, being prepared for a holiday that is extremely focused on food. We also talk about, in many of the clients that we work with in the Prader-Willi syndrome community are working on what's called the red, yellow, and green diet system for weight control. And one of the things that we stress in this actual diet is called a red food day. And these foods are something that are special, like foods like that everybody loves: bacon, fast food, French fries, ice cream, things like that are special, but really high in calories. And so what we recommend to families that are following the red, yellow, and green diet is to have what's called a red food day, which is an extra 300 to 350 calories on that day on top of what they're already getting, and you're really allowing for that and planning for a little bit of weight gain. And so when you plan for that weight gain, you know where the actual weight gain came from, and you're not trying to guess where the actual food, where did they access food to actually gain that weight. So you know where it's coming from. The other thing that I want to talk about is behaviors related to food. And so some of the behaviors that we see in all of these complex syndromes is overeating typical food, eating atypical food like frozen food or raw food that has not been cooked, or even pet food, if there is access to that, and then sneaking or extensively seeking food. We see a lot of food foraging. So there are really, getting their hands on a large amount of food and eating that very quickly. We also see with these complex syndromes really arguing and manipulating to get food. We see this a lot more. It's interesting because we see a lot more of the arguing and manipulating with grandparents, because there are times where grandparents will just give in to what they really, what they think is best, because they really, really want it. And sometimes that's just a grandparent's role to give them what they want. We also see engaging in tantrums to obtain food, shoplifting or stealing food. I have a client that I'm working with right now in the city of New York, and he lives in the center of Manhattan, and he is eloping from school frequently because outside of his school, there are about 12 different food trucks set up on the outside of the street because that's just the community environment of New York City. And so he is actually shoplifting and stealing food from those things and planning to actually go out and get that stuff. We have had clients with both of these syndromes that have broken locks on cabinets and refrigerators or freezers and really engaged in verbal and physical aggression to obtain food. So these are just some of the behaviors that you might see as you're caring for your loved ones with these complex syndromes. The way that you manage those food-seeking behaviors related to food is, like I talked about, food security. So you're locking all areas that contain food. You're locking cabinets, refrigerators, any pantries, anything like that that is going to contain food. Again, we're talking about that structured, predictable routine for meal times. So you're really focusing on that structure and that predictable routine is there, and it doesn't very typically deviate from what you have planned. The other thing that I always talk about is that we don't want to give in to food tantrums. You want to really be consistent. Where I see this a lot is food-seeking behaviors with giving into things is in school systems. So these kids and adults are really, really smart, where they can determine who is the weak link and is going to give them what they want. And they're going to go to that person and they're going to make sure that they get what they want out of that person. So the importance of being consistent when you are providing care to loved ones with Prader-Willi syndrome, Smith-Magenis, pica, all of those complex syndromes is really the key is to be consistent. Another key is also adult supervision. Having adult supervision at all times is really, really essential in order for any of these complex syndromes to be supported. That's also something that I work a lot with schools related to getting that one-to-one support for an aid. I also make recommendations at times that there's no access to money, because we have seen people with these syndromes that whenever they do have access to money, all they want to buy is food. We have a client that we're working with in the center of the state of Pennsylvania right now that he has 2 credit cards that had a $1,500 limit on them. And because he was given access to those credit cards, he actually ran out the balance and maxed out the amount of balance on that, because what he was doing was buying food in the community. He was asking food to be delivered. He was asking food, asking for takeout, going out into the store and buying anything that was food related. And so we had to work with his family to really say, look, having access to money is the reason that he's gaining weight. So really supporting how that's going to happen and planning for those things not to occur. Okay. And that works perfectly with the next slide. So whenever I talk about behaviors related to food, whenever we had that client that was ordering food and seeking food and ordering food in the community on credit cards, we had to alert local authorities about the syndrome. We had to also alert local takeout places to not take orders from him. Alerting local authorities about the syndrome is also something that's really helpful in relation just to safety. And also, if there's ever any safety issues around food in the community, the local authorities are going to be really aware that this is a syndrome that somebody in their community, is experiencing. We never, ever, ever, I never recommend using food during instruction in school or as a reward at school. This is something that we see very frequently, but numerous times, there's always something that you can find outside of M&Ms or candy or whatever it is. You can use non-tangible, non-food related items as a reward in all settings. A lot of these a lot of these kiddos and adults with these complex syndromes are very highly intrinsically motivated to receive rewards, and they really want to please other people. And so engaging in those activities that have rewards or excited things that they're really excited about working for is really going to help with the behaviors as well. You always want to plan for food that is not typical. So for food exposure that's not typical. So for example, if there's a field trip at school, if there's a birthday party or a holiday, a lot of things that, the things that I like to use the best when planning that out with families is a social story. So that not only is their anxiety decreasing related to, you know, this is a change in my day, but the social story actually is just a small narrative to explain to the person with the complex syndrome, you know, with those food-seeking behaviors, what is this going to look like for me? Because when those activities happen, what actually occurs is the first thing that they think about whenever there are food-related behaviors is, how is this going to change my meal routine? Or how is this event going to be something, when is my lunch going to be because this event is happening? Or when is this dinner going to be because this event is happening? And so when you plan that out and really show them how that's going to look, then that anxiety is going to decrease by so much. An alternative setting for all scheduled meal times is also something that's a great strategy. So we have many clients across the country that have difficulties in places like the school cafeteria, eating in the school cafeteria with so many students. You know, I have one student that I'm working with in Fort Wayne, Indiana, that his lunchtime at school in the middle school has over 700 kids. And it is so overwhelming for him to have to go in there. And we noticed in the afternoon was when he was having the most physical and verbal aggression. And when we pulled him out of the cafeteria and stopped focusing on the food, that food was a time for socialization for him, when we pulled him out of the cafeteria and gave him a place to eat in a quieter, more predictable setting in a smaller environment, he actually decreased his behaviors in the afternoon by almost 85%. That verbal and physical aggression went completely away because he wasn't anxious because of that experience with being able to possibly get food that he didn't get his hands on. Okay, so behaviors related to food. There is a concept that was created by Dr. Jan Forrester and Dr. Linda Gorash of the Pittsburgh Partnership that I absolutely love for using with with people with Prader-Willi syndrome, Smith-Magenis, and any of those syndromes that have those food-seeking behaviors. And what this is discussed, that really focuses on, is the idea of no doubt, no hope, and no disappointment. And what that means is that you're really looking at that there is no doubt when the next meal is going to be served. So you have a structured, predictable routine so set out for this person that they're not wondering when the meal is going to happen, when they're going to have lunch, when they're going to have snack. That is not anything that they're thinking about, so that they have the option to look at that schedule, but then go back to what is really the task at hand. So the other thing about this is the no hope piece. And that when you're locking food, the no hope means that there's not the ability to obtain unauthorized food. So there isn't the ability to obtain food that isn't locked because they just can't get it. And a lot of these kids and adults will be excited when food is locked, because then they can actually decrease their anxiety and focus on something different. And then there's no disappointment because the unauthorized food isn't available. So really, when you follow the no hope and or the no doubt, no hope, and no disappointment concept, you really create an environment of food security. And you really create the environment where food security is what is going to create and improve physical and mental health of all persons with these complex syndromes that have food-seeking behaviors. Okay, So managing behaviors related to food. So a lot of times, many of the trainings that I do will focus on, well, what do I do when there are food related behaviors? What could cause a food meltdown? So what could cause a food meltdown is unplanned food exposure. So thinking about food, an upcoming social event, a change in the schedule like we've talked about already, an expected change in a meal, a social situation or an interaction with somebody that doesn't realize that food exposure is going to increase anxiety, or a purposeful meltdown with somebody who they know is going to give in. So when I talked about the consistency piece, I also see these purposeful meltdowns as well with grandparents, or with somebody that they know is going to say, yeah, okay, fine, you can have what you want. So those purposeful meltdowns, these kids are really smart when it comes down to accessing and getting what they want and seeking food. So making sure that you're as consistent as possible and not giving into these meltdowns is really, really key. So when you manage those meltdowns and managing those food-seeking behaviors, you're going to really validate the emotion and make sure that the person that you're working with or that you're dealing with the food-seeking behaviors really understands that you're listening to them. So you might say something such as, I can see that you're upset about what's happening, or I see that you're anxious. How can I help you? Validate that you see that they're frustrated or that they're upset or that they really want something. But what can I do to help you? And then what you might want to do is suggest some coping strategies. Like, okay, I know that you really want that, but let's do some slow counting or some deep, slow breathing just to decrease the anxiety and then redirect them. Another way that you can manage the meltdown is redirecting in a really calm, firm voice, and giving them choices. So saying things like, would you like to watch television or play a game? Which one of those things would you like to do? You also want to make sure that you can guide them through the problem-solving process. So, you know what? I am so sorry. Life happens. You don't want to say life happens, but it does. You want to say, we don't have coffee, but we could drink hot tea or lemonade. Which one would you like? So they have a choice between hot tea or lemonade if there was something that was just a small glitch in the plan. Sometimes it's really impossible to stop a meltdown. So you really want to just remain calm, think before you speak, really speak in a calm voice, avoid yelling. If there is yelling from that person, you want to say things like, when you're done yelling, I can speak with you. And then just wait it out until they are able to come back, calm themselves down, and then really praise them when you see, I love how you're not yelling. So tell me what you want, or how can I help you? Also try not to show fear or anger or frustration, because if you show fear, anger, or frustration, they will play on that and they will make things way worse, because if they see that you're uncomfortable, they're getting that reaction from you that, oh, I see that this person's really uncomfortable and I'm going to play on this. I'm going to make it way worse. You always want to move dangerous objects out of the way and really seek assistance from others if you need that, if they're being physically aggressive. Another strategy that I've seen that's been very effective is retreating to a designated area, giving them a time and a space to calm down. And it sometimes is the same area each time. So you might want to use a verbal command of, you might want to go to your beanbag. It's time for your beanbag chair, so that they are able to kind of sit down, have a sensory, sit down in the beanbag, kind of calm themselves down and get their body ready to focus. Again, if yelling is happening, refuse to speak. So praise them when they're calm and use that redirection to say, I love how you're not yelling. It's time to move on to the next activity. Always move past the episode. This is something that drives me absolutely crazy when people do, that they don't punish or debrief an episode later in the day. What could you have done? Like, for example, I see a lot of teachers that will say, well, it's 3 o'clock. They had a meltdown. related to food at 9 a.m. and they're at 3 p.m. saying, what could you have done better when you were mad earlier today? And a lot of times when you don't move past that episode, all it does is just reunite a new episode, and now you have a whole new behavior problem. So just really moving past the episode, because a lot of these guys, they can't help what the behaviors are because of those chromosomal deletions. So it's not as if you are trying to replace these behaviors. What you're trying to do is decrease them. You're not really ever going to eliminate them, because it's really based on that environment. You're going to avoid reigniting the anger or the frustration, like I talked about. Never giving in to unreasonable demands, and really also just looking at letting the meltdown run its course and moving on. Just really focusing on, okay, we're calm now, let's go to the next thing. So in summary, related to the food-seeking behaviors, really how you're going to manage all of these behaviors is by total food security, as best as possibly that you can do that, and limiting food exposure. Really working on positive behavior support and verbal praise. So really being excited when you see those behaviors that you really want to see in a person. Increasing those reward systems, making those reward systems something really engaging and something that they're really interested in. Those environmental accommodations and modifications. So locking food, making those structured, predictable schedules and meal times, those visuals like we talked about with the pace and chase strategy, the preparation for any changes and that predictability that's going to happen across the environment. And you always want to think outside the box of managing behaviors. It might not necessarily mean that you're going to give a consequence to a person. You might just, move on and just move on with that behavior and not really try to focus on, okay, I'm going to try to teach you a new behavior. You want to really just think outside the box and really, like I always say, pick the hill to die on. The safety plans, always have a safety plan on how you're going to focus on dealing with those physical and verbal aggression episodes. So I'm going to talk to you about two programs that we have at the Children's Institute that are also another resource for you. So at the Children's Institute, we offer video conferencing and trainings about Prader-Willi syndrome, Smith-Magenis, other obesity-related disorders, and a lot of different disabilities as well. We work a lot with schools for pain management. We work with a lot for schools for understanding how to support all of these complex syndromes in the least restrictive environment. So we work with video conferencing trainings to schools, group homes, and pretty much anybody that's working with children and adults with Prader-Willi syndrome, with Smith-Magenis, with pica, with any of those really complex syndromes that are really just hard to support in a lot of different settings. The fee for the training is $200 an hour, and typically schools or group homes or the agency that is seeking the training pays for that. And what we do is we create a contract, and then the specific agency or the school or the group home decides, we want X amount of hours of training, and then we provide those by video conferencing. We can also do educational advocacy, which is support during an IEP or a school meeting. So my specific background is in, my PhD is in special education. And so, supporting persons with rare syndromes in those least restrictive environments is something that I have a huge passion about. So really helping school teams understand how to support a person with Smith-Magenis or Prader-Willi syndrome in those areas is really, really key. The other thing is we also can do in-person observation of the student with Smith-Magenis in trainings across the country. Okay. And then really quickly, I just want to tell you also about our new program, which is Prader-Willi syndrome and other obesity-related disorders care coordination. And basically, the purpose of this program is to ensure that adults and children with these rare genetic syndromes are receiving the appropriate medical and behavioral health care across all environments. So when we enroll persons with Prader-Willi syndrome and Smith-Magenis and Down syndrome or other obesity-related disorders, we create a care plan. And that care plan can actually assist with can actually consist of a lot of different things. So it can consist of assistance with diets and weight management. It can assist with consultation or training for school teams or other people or other stakeholders. It can explore the possibility of residential placement, which we've done with a lot of our clients. We can provide specific behavior support that is consistent with your child or your adult, or your loved one that's an adult even. We can identify different community resources and supports that are available, and then just really support the overall health and wellness of a person with Smith-Magenis or Prader-Willi syndrome. It is a fee-based package, and it's a fee-based service, and it's based on level of need. So whenever you call to get an assessment, it's by phone. We get all of the information, and then we determine what level that your loved one is on, and then you're able to buy a different service for a different level. So level 1 is approximately about 10 hours. For 3 months of service, it's $2,500. And we have many clients across the country that are using waiver funding to support payment for these programs. Level 2 is basic services, which is approximately 20 hours, and that covers 3 months. We have extended services, which is the higher levels, and the intensive services as level 4, and that's approximately 30 and 40 hours. And at level 3 and level 4, you also get a success kit. So that comes with measuring cups, measuring spoons, some things to help with diet, food scale, a bathroom scale. There's a Fitbit. There's lots of different things that are incorporated into these levels. And then you can also buy care coordination services by the hour. So it's been something that's been very successful for Prader-Willi syndrome. We currently have 82 clients that are in this fee-for-service program that are using waiver funding. We've had parents that have done GoFundMe pages. We've had parents that have gotten religious organizations to support, the funding for this service, and it's been very, very successful. So I think now I just want to thank PRISM for letting me, inviting me to speak tonight, and I think that we can open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. McTighe, for that fantastic instruction on managing food-seeking behavior. This is such an important issue for so many of our SMS families, so thank you for extending your work to Smith-Magenis syndrome. Before we do move on to questions, for the question and answer portion of our webinar, I have a short video to introduce you to a very special Smith-Magenis syndrome family, the Farber family. The Farbers are very active PRISMS volunteers. In fact, Sylvia is part of our webinar committee and serves the SMS community in so many different ways. So I hope you enjoy meeting Sylvia and Austin.
Hello, my name is Austin, and this is my mom. And I wanted us to co-coordinate for this video. I have SMS. I was diagnosed with SMS when I was 5 years old.
Before Austin's diagnosis, we were lost and confused and had no support. No one understood the behavior and sleep challenges that we faced. When we were given the diagnosis, the neurologist handed us a piece of paper and said, "I don't know much about SMS, but here's a website." The PRISMS website is where we were directed. From that moment on, PRISMS became a lifeline for us. They were the only source of education, information, and support. We've been to 4 conferences and don't think we will ever miss one. Not only is gaining new information and hearing the latest research and best practices helpful and valuable to us, but it's the only place we can go to a shared space where we have no judgment from others. There's nothing like that. Even though there's no denying that SMS is hard, I am so thankful to have PRISMS on the journey with us. Anything else you want to say?
I can't wait to see you this summer at the conference.
Thank you, Sylvia and Austin, for putting that fantastic video together. Now we have some time for a few questions. Also, I want to mention, take a look at prisms.org under the education tab, and you can register for a special education webinar with Sylvia as our speaker. So we have a lot of questions tonight. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we will answer what we can. Let me take a look here. Dr. McTighe, let's see. We have our first question. And our first question is, what are your thoughts on using food as a motivator or reward? With the high incidence of obesity in SMSers, we've been very wary of using food as a motivator with ABA therapy and other situations. However, food is a strong motivator. Could it be used to draw out the behaviors we want to encourage?
So that's a great question, actually. I would not suggest using food as a motivator. I have not seen that ever being successful in any of the syndromes that I work with. Typically, we try to find something that is less of a preoccupation, something that is an interest, but it's not something that is food related, because it can cause weight gain and just cause that increased anxiety in those different environments. So I would not recommend using food as a reward.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is, are you finding that adults with SMS have diabetes? We're worried about this with our 30-year-old daughter with SMS. She's about 5'2" and weighs 240 pounds.
Yeah, we see that a lot with Prader-Willi syndrome and SMS. We do see that adults are more prone to having that, adult onset diabetes type thing. But yes, we do see that. But I'm not saying that every person with, these complex syndromes would develop that diabetes piece. But I have seen it very frequently.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, the next question from our audience is, I was surprised by the no helping with meal preparation clearing recommendation. SMSers are known for being helpers and loving to help around the house. Can you speak more about how you've seen helping with meal prep result in increased anxiety?
Yeah, so I've seen actually helping with meal prep being more of a concern and increased anxiety for persons with Prader-Willi syndrome. I have seen that people with children and adults with Smith-Magenis don't have as much anxiety around food in those situations, but regarding a best practice for specifically PWS, it is not recommended that they help with meal preparation. But again, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, everybody, all of these syndromes are a spectrum disorder. So it might be something that doesn't cause anxiety in one person, that it could be a huge problem in another. So it really just depends on the person.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, they are all different.
They are.
Aren't they? Okay, so we have one final question. So only allowing water except for special occasions seems to be an easy way to reduce calorie intake. Your thoughts on this?
Yes, absolutely. I always recommend using any water or liquids that you're taking that they're consuming should never have calories in them. It's really difficult whenever you're getting a lot of calories by liquids. So if you only contain that to special events, that's typically a best practice. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, great. Actually, I said that was the last, but I do see one more here for us.
Sure.
Our adult son has SMS. He doesn't seek food. His obsession is seeking any beverage that he believes contains energy: coffee, tea, cola, energy drinks, 5-hour energy, Mountain Dew, etc. The behavior is severe, life-limiting. Have you encountered this specific obsession, and do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so that would be the exact same thing with engaging in as much food security with those drinks as you can. So making them not accessible or also locking those would be the best option, but I have seen that very frequently in all of these syndromes, yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you again so much, Dr. McTighe, for this incredible information. I know this is going to be such a great resource for our SMS community.
Absolutely.
And I hope everyone learned as much as I did tonight from your food seeking presentation.
Yeah, and again, thanks PRISM for letting me participate. I would love to do it again.
Great, thank you so much. So
no problem.
Everyone, please be on the lookout for an email with a link for a recording of this webinar. as well as a survey. Please take a little time to fill out. It's a short survey because we'd love to know how we did. I hope everyone will join us at future PRISMS webinars. Please like us, follow us on social media. Please join PRISMS if you're not already a member. Membership is free, and it's a great way to stay up to date with everything going on with SMS. PRISMS is a nonprofit. All of our programs, including our webinar series, are fully funded by our generous donors. So if you're interested in supporting PRISMS and the program that it provides for families impacted by Smith-Magenis syndrome, then please visit our website, prisms.org, and consider making a donation. So this concludes our webinar for this evening. I hope everyone has a great evening and good night.
Good night.